Okay, so this plaster mold is what we're going to be using to wrap the clay around. I want to wrap this with newspaper. Okay, so I'm going to take this piece of newspaper and I'm going to pull this up around the mold, and I'm going to roll the mold. Okay, just around. I just used one thin sheet of newspaper. You want to tape the paper to itself, but you're not taping anything to the mold, okay? So I'm just going to fold this newspaper down and make it as flat as okay. Part, all of this, I'm just going to tear it off, okay? So the wider end, I just tear off this newspaper. Newspaper now will slide off of this mold, so I can take it and just pull it right off, okay? So that's what you want it to be. So if you taped it to the mold, that wouldn't work. Okay, so this mold rolls at an angle, so I follow that angle and trace out that line, and then I cut this edge, straight with the mold, and that's a scrap. Save all your scraps, and then I'll do the same at the other side. Cut off this extra. I can use that slab later, so. Okay, and then where I traced this little rainbow line, I'm going to cut it now. And I just use the needle tool for this. It's handy. Save my scraps. Little scraps, by the way, you'll want to keep kind of covered with plastic, or else they'll get dry really fast. Are you writing the steps? Don't get zoned out. What's the last thing you wrote? Check. Make sure you're keeping track. This stuff will be hard to remember. And I give you a lot of kind of helpful little tips as we go. Write those down because you won't remember them. Okay, then I'm going to lift this up and wrap this as I roll. Same kind of thing I did with the newspaper before. Okay, and I have a lot of overlap here, so I'm gonna cut some of that off. So that I have I want like an inch of overlap is all. Okay, so when I wrap that around, an inch, half an inch to an inch is really fine of overlap. Okay, so I have that, and I'm careful not to really smush this yet. Like I'm not pressing anything yet. But then my next step after I roll that around and kind of trim, I'm gonna trim the top and the bottom so they're flat with the mold. So I'll just use my needle tool. Okay, and then around the bottom, same thing. If it's really, really like wavy or something, I would maybe try to fix it. Okay, so we've got top and bottom trimmed, so it's basically straight all the way around. Now this next step is the part that everybody gets way confused on, so pay attention closely. I'm going to make this, right now we have this overlap and it's really thick right there where the two layers are. We're going to cut it so that they meet up perfectly and there's no overlap, okay? So I'm going to take this, I'm going to hold my needle tool at an angle toward the top overlap. Okay, so this would be toward the bottom overlap, and I'm going to hold it toward the top one, this way. That's important. That will make a big difference. I'm going to cut through both layers at the same time and go all the way down the whole piece. Okay? So I'm kind of running the needle tool along the newspaper all the way through. So this top little chunk that I cut off, I'm going to take that off. Then I have to open this up a little bit, just carefully, and peel off that inside little scrap that I just cut. Okay, now watch. Okay, how that fits perfectly. But I'm going to use a needle tool and make these score lines that are like crisscrosses. And then I'll do this piece. Your score lines should be kind of deeper. Don't make them too shallow. That's why a needle tool is good, because it's really sharp. Okay, so I'm just going to take this and apply this to the edge here. And then that's enough slip for both sides, so I'm just going to carefully press these two pieces together. Now, the slip is kind of squeezing out a little bit, which is fine. I'm going to kind of wipe the excess back onto the slip container. I want to use pressure. That's an important thing with scoring and slipping, that you actually press the two pieces together, because if you just kind of set them together, they won't really stay. When you press and apply that pressure, that's what creates like a suction between them, and then they won't come apart. I'm going to use my scrap now. My next step is to add the base for my mug. So I take a scrap that I have that's big enough, and I'm going to take the mug and set it here. Now I'm doing this on the smaller end of the mug. Could I make a base on the bigger end?
Yeah, if you wanted to.
If I wanted to, but the important thing is I would need to take the mold out first, because if I added the base on the bigger end, I would not be able to get the mold out. So I'm just going to do it on the smaller end, so I can leave the mold in. I'm going to set that there on this scrap slab. It's all the same thickness. Use my needle tool and trace that shape all the way around. Then I can move my mug out of the way, because it's easier to cut when you don't have that in the way. And then I'm just going to use my needle tool to carefully cut that. Okay, that fits on there. Now, what do you think I need to do? I need to score and slip. Nice and rough. Your slip should be about this consistency, by the way. It can be thinner though, and it's fine, but I wouldn't go thicker than this. Okay, so again, pressure is important. Because I'm going to blend the clay on this seam, but then I can use my fingers, and I'm pulling this clay from the bottom up. I think I didn't have that twisted the right way, but that's okay. You take pretty much anything to create a texture, and it can be really cool. Got left here months ago. I'm going to keep my scraps covered because they've been sitting out for a little while. And I could take something like that, and if I carve and the clay's really wet, see how that left these little like burrs? I call them boogers, but the little like little crumbs around the side. Body of the mug made, I can take the mold out. Now here's something about the molds though. We don't have enough for everybody to have one, like to keep it with your project. So if class ends and you're not finished, you know, adding the base or something, you can take it out and just store it on a bat and put the mold away so the other classes can use them, and then next time you just grab it and put it back on to finish, okay? So leave the newspaper in, of course, until you're totally done with the mold, but we can't keep the molds every day. We've got to let the other classes use them. Okay, once I'm finished with the outside form, then I can take the newspaper out. You guys ready? You can see that seam along the side, so I'm going to smooth that seam out. I like to use these tools, these wooden modeling tools with the curved ends on them. And I just smooth that across all the way down. Okay, now the very bottom seam where I've attached the base, I'm going to do something more there because